Good morning, Paris.
Even if it's a bit rainy, I mean, Paris is still a cool city to be,
And
right?
striking.
Okay. By the way, a good question for Toby as a start. Don't you miss Barcelona right now? I mean,
It reminds me much of London. So, I mean, where I'm kind of from. So, I mean, I miss Barcelona, but it's kind of like home.
okay, excellent, guys. I think this will be, after talking about design, the most technical discussion that we'll have today, talking about SaaS and APIs. Is it a love story? We'll talk about technical stuff, but I think more than just technical, the relationship between SaaS and API also builds the entire business model of our SaaS companies. It has an impact on the whole acquisition process, on the way that you monitor your company. And so the entire strategy is also linked to the way you build your SaaS and you connect it to the ecosystem. I would just like to start quickly with you, Toby. Could you tell us a bit about your story, how you came up with the idea of building Typeform, and also very interesting what you did right before with Path Intelligence, where you've been handling a lot of data, how you've structured the relationship of your platform and all the amount of data.
Okay, that's quite a lot there. So my last company was Path Intelligence. What we did there was we created some sensors that observed mobile phones to kind of understand behaviors, trying to do like a Google Analytics for the real world. And I think what was interesting there, we had a lot of data to do. We kind of knew about the data, we knew what was there. But it was obviously a lot of issues around trying to get the balance between privacy and things. And I think that's one of the issues we have with that more than anything else. Typeform is a very different business. We have a lot less data, but it's much more complicated because people are using that to do their own thing. You know, we don't control the schema or the structure of the data. They do their own thing, which creates a lot of issues around, you know, trying to figure out how to give the users the data back in a way that they can use easily. So a lot of the issues we have, or some of the challenges, is around being able to help people get to their content easily when they're structured in lots of different ways. And again, going to the API piece, is how do you then make the APIs easy to use to be able to pull that data out and through to they can do their applications as easily as possible. And I think one of the challenges we're working with right now is, you know, the Typeform itself has come from a very design focus. It's very much a very beautiful layout. And what we're trying to do right now is to be able to apply that kind of sort of beauty and design thinking to the APIs to make that as a seamless and easy to use setup as it has been for the sort of the UI parts.
How do you gather feedback from your user on, you know, API, documentation, etc.?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think there's a lot of things we can do. Obviously, with APIs, it's interesting because you can get a lot of understanding from data. You can see what APIs people are using, how they're using them. There's obviously direct feedback. One of the first things we did when we started doing some of our developer APIs was open like a Slack channel, but we have devs in to let anybody who's using the APIs to be able to talk to us directly. I mean, there's quite a lot of noise you have to deal with, but it's a great way of getting immediate feedback of something that's going on. They can drop in and talk to some devs who can actually make some actions, some differences. So I think having direct feedback is super important, particularly when you're in the development phase. When you're trying to do betas and stuff, having a select group of people to give you immediate feedback on issues is very helpful.
So you had to scale a team directly to gather this feedback, right?
We did it, and it was a limited kind of trial. I mean, it was, so this is for what we call Typeform.io, where you could create forms using an API. And so we introduced that to like a select group of people, so it wasn't like to everybody, it wasn't our whole user base, because the product doesn't apply to the whole user base. But I think it's been a useful exercise in kind of having some direct communication, certainly.
Excellent, cool. Thanks for all this exchange. Quickly, I wanted to switch to Eric. You are leading a 100% API-based company. It's a really interesting model. Can you tell us a bit more about exactly what's the value proposition of the company?
Sure. So what we do is to facilitate the consumption of APIs in real time, any API, and we make it possible in a few minutes. So without APIs, we wouldn't have a business. What we've experienced is that it was actually easier for people to develop mobile or IoT or desktop applications based on existing APIs rather than starting from scratch. And the issue that people were facing, developers, were the idea of having dynamic data being exposed to any kind of device. We've experienced it ourselves because we started by working on projects, and we wanted to create a product that would actually address the pain we had experienced.
That might be useful for SLASK, right?
Yep. Yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, we started to talk about it yesterday night.
Okay, good. Still a business event, right?
Exactly.
Okay, could you tell us how, I mean, it's a very unique business that you have, how this API-based model is shaping your pricing scheme, all the way you do the technical scaling internally? I mean, there's a lot of unique challenges that you're facing.
Sure. So in terms of pricing, what we tried to do was to be as simple as possible, while sticking to our marginal cost metrics. So we came up with the pricing per message up to a certain level where we need to have a discussion with the developers. Now, in terms of the way it works from a marketing and sales perspective, we're able to be used by customers we've never met because they integrate us into their applications. We're able to create OEMs without meeting with people because they integrate us and start reselling us onto their customer, directly integrating our API into their technology. And we're able also, as you do, to integrate features in a few days just by integrating external API. So if we go back to the traditional sales way of selling, it is either we integrate a feature so that we have a better product, or we get integrated into somebody else's API so that they have a better product, or sometimes we co-market, which is something we've started with an ecosystem of API vendors called FinTech Revolution. We're the only one in France, part of it, with Nasdaq, Yodlee, and Xignite. And this is co-marketing. So we have an API, they have an API, we know each other, we know their proposition, and when we face a customer, we direct them to the others. So API is also a great way of co-marketing.
Can I ask a question, Eric? I mean, one of the challenges we have is how much do you give to developers for free? You want to get people into the platform, you want to get them playing with it. How do you make it so that it's free, but when they start doing something serious with it, that there's some pain there, so they have to start paying? I mean, it's a bit of a trade-off. We
address that challenge by putting ourselves in their shoes, and we wanted for developers to be able to create alpha up to, let's say, up to 100 devices that are not consuming too much, or one device that is a heavy user, and then they start to pay. So the alpha phase and all the prototyping is free, and then they start paying. It's usually at the time when they start monetizing. So it's when defining the frontier for your freemium that you need to think about the kind of expectation from a developer perspective. So it's also design thinking for developers. That's what Didier was talking about.
I think it's a good transition. We can talk quickly with Rémi about what happens to you actually at SLASK. Very interesting. I mean, your business is based on Slack, so it's a kind of dependence. It's a huge opportunity. You have a faster go-to-market. At the same time, okay, there might be further challenges on the road. Can you tell us a bit more about your experience?
Yeah, of course, yeah. I think it's everybody you just tell. It's a dependency. It's a faster go-to-market. Of course, we can use their data and everything they got, their users. They are very famous and growing really fast. So we are based on them, and we are really dependent to them, to their API. But it's quite okay because I think we are good guys. They are good guys, and it's we are bringing so much value to the product, and we are doing co-marketing and everything. So every time we talk about SLASK, we talk about Slack. So they like it, and we are close to them, and it's not a bad dependency, I think.
It kind of reminds me when Facebook started, and they had all this partners at the beginning, and then, okay, open API, guys, come on, let's do open graph, let's build stuff around this, and then it went more structured, and then some stuff has been cut out, so for the partners it has been tough sometimes, but it's still maintaining a kind of ecosystem. I would be really interested to know what's your roadmap, your vision, product vision, because you're based on one technology. How do you add value to something that already exists? How do you get money out of it? That's, I mean, tough challenge.
Yeah. At Slaask, we are building a LifeChat solution, a customer service app for Slack, and you integrate it in your website, and in a few clicks and a few copy paste, and you can answer and receive questions from your visitor into Slack, and that's how we bring value to Slack, because Slack is internal solution, and we are creating a window for their Slack to their visitors. We promise to our customers to increase radically their response time and really less friction, and that's how we bring value to Slack, and yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's cool, and you have so brilliant actuality. I mean, at the moment, it's you're on the. Everyone talks about you. So
Yeah.
it's a cool moment for you. That's perfect.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. I would also like to have your feedback on your future vision of what will be the connection between different SaaS. How, I mean, APIs will evolve. I mean, having machine-to-machine SaaS, having, I mean, automated ecosystem.
Sure. We're well into it right now. Actually, we have people that have started to build on our platform an end-to-end IoT to business processing chain that is end-to-end event-driven, which is something that was difficult to create until HTTP could support real-time with HTTP2. So what's going on? So we're already into the let's say the third phase of internet. You know, it went from just IP, then to HTTP in 1990, and then to the programmable web with REST in 2000. Now we're into a phase of integration that includes the physical world and all the efficiency that we've seen in information sharing over the internet we're going to see in our day-to-day life with automation in general, including into industrial processes. So it's a fascinating world that will require for people to be excellent at what they do and to be cognizant of everything else that happens in the API world. If you look at the API world today, there are around 15,000 APIs public. If you actually dig into them, you only have 2,000 that have a real business behind them, which is really small compared to what we have in the web world. So we should expect for the API world and the programmable society to explode and be, I hope, bringing more value to citizens.
Maybe a quick question for the fellows that are here in the audience regarding when in a business you have to open your API to external partners, when you should, I mean, rely on integrators, when you should grab service revenue because you integrate your own tech platform. I mean, that's also a real challenge, and maybe a lot of entrepreneurs are asking those questions on a daily basis at the minute.
Well, in our case, that was day one, so
exactly
that was easy. And anybody who thinks that his API is internal need to think twice and make it external from the beginning with the security, the scalability that is needed for you to support a large audience. Otherwise, when you want to open to partners, you're going to say, well, shit, I can't do business with these guys just because I didn't think about my API to be open one day, which is a shame because you're missing business.
Yeah, I mean, from our side, I think originally the first iteration of the platform, APIs came at the end. And at the moment, we're reworking that because what we're realizing, particularly with the move to microservices, which is going to be heavily API focused anyway, we need to be thinking about everything potentially being exposed as an API externally. so that, and that opens up much more functionality. So, we can start doing integrations and crazy things that we haven't thought of right now if we can access every part of the application through an API. It's much easier to kind of work on that basis than try and drive it back into it later on. And certainly from our perspective, what we see is that there's a bit of a tension right now. There's a lot of kind of integrators like Zapier out there who are kind of helping people and you guys, I guess, do the APIs. And, sometimes it's like, there creates quite a lot of lock-in. When you have the connection through, it helps with retention. If someone's built their whole business process through your system, it's a great way of building retention. So, at what point do you use other companies to help do that sort of integration piece? And what are the integrations do you do? If they're super core to your business, is that something you should do yourselves? Or is it something you get other partners to do? Is it, do you want to go very wide or very deep? And there's quite a bit of attention. And I think it's a really important question to think about. But most importantly for me is building it right. I mean, if I was going to do it again now with the whole microservices thing, it would be definitely thinking about APIs all the way through, because it makes it so much easier later on than trying to reverse it.
That's a very good advice for the audience. I mean, guys, be open-minded. It's API first. Yeah. So open up. Slaask? Are you API open on your side?
Yeah, we are. We are API consumer and producer. So we deliver an API for our customers, for our SDK, JavaScript SDK, iOS, and everything. And yeah, that's really important. I think it's to open his mind and open his API. You have to be focused on the developer experience in the API. You can't just do an API because you want to. You have to build it. It's really about a product. It's a product, an API. And it should be designed, it should be secured, it should be in everything monitored. And
that's a good point. As you just said, it's a product. Does it mean that you need to have a specific development team and a documentation team? See what I mean? Is it a different company within the same company? How is it organized?
I don't know, maybe for you it's your core business, so it's
sure, core business.
Yeah. It's not a company within the company, but it is the core. It is the core team, and then the front-end people would actually use the API, and you have tension, and you need to have tension between your front-end team and the API team, so that they are the first one to challenge the API design. The API itself has to be your core business when you're in SaaS, if you want to be looking after a global market. I do not envisage a SaaS business in B2B that is not core on its API in terms of the most revenue it takes, because it gets revenue from machines, whereas the web interface takes revenue from people. From my experience in high-frequency trading, you make way more money with machines than you make with humans.
And at the end, it's about revenue. I mean,
with no shame.
Yeah. Okay, great. I mean, if you make a synthesis, what advice would you give to people starting their company, now scaling their company, thinking about going global and having their API open and documented?
So, I mean, if we're doing it again, I think the heavy focus on API is important. I think the challenge, I mean, this is kind of becoming more of a development question for me, in that how do you build your product? Often what tends to happen is you build like a monolith to start with, and then once you get to scaling issues, you start splitting it out. I mean, I think so there's a bit of a challenge around, you want to be doing APIs at the beginning, but you don't really know necessarily how your kind of business flow works at the beginning. So trying to build these sort of microservices really early on can be difficult. So I mean, I think for me, we want to be thinking about the business process, where the API is useful to start with, but not necessarily trying to be putting APIs within the sort of subparts of your system really early on, until you really understand how the flows are going. But certainly when they become more obvious, then by driving that in, I think it's really important to do. I mean, I think ultimately, you've got to be thinking about getting as much of the functionality of what you're building out to enable other people to tap into it. I mean, I'll give you a good example. One of the things that we did, we built this I/O product to build to allow people to build APIs, to get it out there. And then we decided that we wanted to try and build a Typeform mobile version to allow people to build on mobile devices. Now, rather than trying to incorporate a main product, which would have taken ages, we just built on top of the API version that we created, and we just did it in a couple of months. So, you know, it really helps to have the ability to get the functionality in easily, but you need to kind of have an understanding of how the flows work before you can really get that right.
Yeah, I think it depends on if you are a consumer or provider of APIs. And if you are, normally if you are a provider, API provider, I see a lot of people doing two APIs, one private, one public, and it's, I think, an horrible idea. You just should build one strong and secure API, and it's always better to use your own product internally. So if your main website or your main iOS app on I don't know what is you are working with your own API, public API, so it's a good way to have your own feedbacks and your own debug and everything. So don't build two APIs, build one strong one and open as possible.
Be your own client.
Can I just add one thing to that, which I just remembered? One of the things that's really important also, I think, is to make sure early on you create guidelines for how you build APIs. You know, there's a lot of specifics around how you deal with versioning, how you deal with authentication, and I think getting consistency across the business is really important, because what tends to happen is if you have the autonomy of the teams, everyone will do slightly different versions of things, and you end up with a bit of a mess. Because ultimately, if you want to be taking these APIs out to your customers, you need to have a nice, consistent kind of view of how it works and have everything working the same, like the consistency of the previous slides. And I think making sure you get the guidelines right early on and thinking through some of this detail really helps to make sure you build that across everything you do.
So focus on it and document it.
Can I give 3 advice?
Sure.
I'll be
as
short.
much as the time allows us to have.
Right, be API first. I think when you're into B2B SaaS, that's the best way to have the best time to market ever. The second thing is, when you do that, think about spending way more time than you can imagine in surveying the landscape, understanding your ecosystem, and make sure you're the best in the world in whatever you do, and focus on it. Even if it's a very small component, you just want to be the best and think global from the beginning, which is one thing that I do not see much in French culture, whereby we tend to actually progress on an idea and then start thinking about, okay, what's going on in the world? You can't do that with APIs, because if a great API already exists with something similar to what you do, you're not going to exist. And the third one is, in terms of best practice, to get back to the design thinking, put yourself in the shoes of the developer that will consume your API. Think about all the best practices used to, so REST API, JSON, HTTP. I mean, this is basic for them. And if you start going with a documentation that is not OpenAPI or a format that is not JSON, then you're just spending effort on a population that's not with a bright future anyway, so you don't care about them. So yeah, spend some time on the technical front, just making sure you understand what is the best practice as shared by the leader in the industry.
Yeah, and just to complete, I think the strength of API, it's built by developers for developers. So it's really a strength, because you can implicate your developers as a product team, an internal product team. If you tell them you will use this API, they will say, okay, so I won't do something bad. Or
Eat your own food.
Yeah, eat your own food, yeah.
Perfect, guys. Toby, Eric, Rémi, thanks a lot. I think it was a wonderful session. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.